I'd like to thank our sponsor, Cobia Boats, bringing you this episode of the On the Water podcast. From tournament fishing to cruising with family and friends, Cobia Boats will hook you with fishing features done right and comfort that doesn't quit. Check out their full line of center consoles and dual consoles at cobiaboats.com and give them a follow on social at Cobia Boats. Choose Cobia and have it all.
Welcome to another episode of the On the Water podcast. I'm Jimmy Fee. This week I'm here with Kevin Gould, who's kind of one of the local fishermen. Kind of does it all, man. From like pike through the ice to bluefin tuna. Like there's nothing you don't seem to do. You just seem to be one of those guys that like has to be fishing 12 months a year.
Yeah, I'm not one of those guys that's going to go trudge through the mud in the middle of the winter to try and catch a holdover striper. I'd rather be doing something else. So I'll take advantage of whatever season is available, whether it's stock trout, largemouth bass in the spring, golden shiners in the fall.
So tell us a little bit about your background, man. How did you get started fishing? What was your fishing history?
Well, my grandparents had a cottage on Sebago Lake, and so I spent a lot of hours on the dock catching nothing. My first fish was a mackerel off the town pier in Yarmouth, Maine.
You're from Maine originally, right?
Yeah. One day we were down at the dock and we saw somebody chunking mackerel for stripers, and I thought, there's a fish out there that eats these mackerel. I want to catch that. So the first fish I ever saw was 35 and a half inches, and the guy said, oh, it's too small, and he threw it back because it was one at 36 at the time. And I thought, how big do these things get if 35 inches is too small? It looked like a whale to me.
Dude, everybody has that kind of like introduction to stripers, especially if you started fishing back then when the size limit was so high. I remember my parents visited Newport, Rhode Island when I was just getting into striped bass fishing. I hadn't caught my first one yet. And they went there, they saw somebody fishing, and they asked him what lure he was using. They bought it for me, and it was bigger than the largemouth bass that I was like typically catching. It was the same thing. I'm like, well, I only want to fish for these things then.
And now you're probably thinking back on how that plug would probably work pretty well for for largemouth.
Exactly. Yeah, it's funny how things kind of come full circle, dude.
Yeah.
So I met you through one of our former circulation managers, and he was always kind of talking reverently about you. He's like, oh, Kevin got a bonito in the canal. Kevin went out on his boat after work and caught a bluefin tuna. I'm like, who is this dude? I'm like, and how is he always catching bigger fish than me? And you used to work at Falmouth Bait and Tackle too, right?
Correct.
So we also met through there, and we would, before we even fished together, we kind of like never really crossed paths, but we'd be in the similar areas. I remember there was a big bite here on Cape Cod on the beaches, where like you went out one night and caught a really big fish, and I was in the neighborhood back when you had that good Cape Cod Bay bite on eels.
Yeah, that was it was the biggest stripe I'd ever caught at the time. Luckily, there was another guy there that had a scale. Otherwise, I would have swore it was a 50, but it was high 40s. And I thought about keeping it, but I was about 2 miles from my truck, and I did not feel like carrying it back.
It's amazing. That makes the decision for so many people, man, having to trudge that thing back.
Yeah.
But you also, on your boat, have caught one of the biggest striped bass I've heard about since living on Cape Cod. And I remember you texted me that morning. It was mid-May. I think it was May 16th.
Yeah, that was on Jeff's boat, though. That wasn't on my own boat.
Okay.
That was when he had his yellow Jones Brothers.
So Captain Jeff Fortin, right?
Yep, correct.
So you texted me, and it was so early in the season. I saw the picture. I was asleep on the couch. Woke up, because I think I came in from fishing that night. Saw it, and I'm like, oh, man. I was like, that looks like it's over 40 pounds. You're like, try again. And it was a 64-pound striped bass. And, man, like, you don't hear, like, that is just such an enormous fish. And for it to be there on May 16th, like, you guys must have been.
That was 9 o'clock in the morning on a beautiful sunny day, probably 6 feet of water. We were throwing plugs. I was throwing the dock, and he was throwing a paddle tail. We followed a school of pogies from Upper Buzzards Bay all the way up into the west end of the canal. And somewhere up in Upper Buzzards Bay, we hit that one on the nose.
Now, had you been seeing big fish already that season, or was that like the first wave of them? Because I don't remember hearing of anything over 30 pounds at that point.
So we always get a lot of 15 to 25 pound fish in kind of the lower Buzzards Bay area before they move into the rest of Cape Cod. So we were probably chasing a lot of 28 to 36 inch fish that day. I do remember that I got one over 40 pounds right after, and nobody looked twice at it after Jeff caught his.
Now, what did he catch it on?
It was on a 6.5 inch white pro tail, 2 ounce.
man. So tell me this story. Like, what was the retrieve like? Was it a cast at a breaking fish, or
we moved into the point where these fish move up into a rock pile. There's some good current around this point, and he pulled up way too far into it. And I was gonna say something, but I didn't. So it was probably his first cast. And this fish, ate moving west. And then next thing I know, he's 200 yards to the east down in the current with his head down. And he's just fishing 30-pound fluorocarbon. So I can hear that line rubbing on the kelp and the weed down there. And the fish comes up, and I said, there's no way that fish is 5 feet long. But it was.
Oh, man.
Jeff said, get the net. I said, I've never netted a striper in my life. I'm not going to start now. I'm going to screw it up. So I just reached down with both thumbs and grabbed his lips.
What an incredible fish, man. And for that early, and I remember that
on
made
such light tackle.
Yeah.
You know, it's not that abnormal for 50 feet of water off Block Island, but for 6 feet of water in Buzzards Bay.
Yeah, casting a small paddle tail, too.
That's why I said he must have hit him on the nose, because that fish isn't going out of his way for a 2-ounce plug.
Oh, yeah. Dude. The only other 60 also that I know about on the Cape also came from the canal recently. I know there's been plenty of them, but like the other like famous 60-pounder, I think it was also 64, was caught on a chunk in the Cape Cod Canal on like Halloween night in 1999. But that was really cool, man. That fish that early in 2016, that kicked off like a great week of fishing too. I remember that there was a pretty early run of big fish that year.
I definitely heard stories from some guys fishing the canal. They hooked fish they couldn't stop that morning.
But you right now you live in Massachusetts, just off Cape, and I mean striped bass. Tell me about your fishing season. How does it begin?
Well, I think of it as starting in November, December when the tuna leave, and I start trying to stock up my tank for pike fishing with golden shiners and fall fish or whatever I can get. I almost have more fun catching golden shiners than I do actually catching the pike. But it's funny, it takes 12 hours of bait fishing for 6 hours of ice fishing. And it's a big ordeal to drive out to Western Mass with my 50-gallon tank in the bed of the truck trying to keep them alive just to kill the bait before I put it down the hole that morning. So I'll ice fish whenever I can this year. It was, I think, 3 days before I fell through and called it quits.
You went through the ice this year?
I did, but it was 3 feet of water. It wasn't a big deal.
Oh, man. Was it early ice or just kind of a weird...
No, it was late ice, and it was I crossed over a pressure ridge, and my buddies were already out on the lake, and they said it's fine, made it over fine, fished all day. Coming back, it didn't look good, so I took my backpack off, threw it on the sled that my dad had, jumped across the pressure ridge, and went right through. I'm 220 pounds, he's 170 pounds, so he's like, I think I can make that, and he jumped across no problem. So he was rubbing that in my face as I'm freezing the whole ride home.
Oh, man.
And of course, my it's glare ice, my crampon's stuck in the mud, the bottom of the pond, so now I'm wet, slipping all the way back to the truck.
Oh, dude, that's scary, but at least, like you said, it's only 3 feet of
and
water,
the air temp was 45.
Yeah. We've compared a lot of notes on catching shiners. Going back to, I remember you've tried all different manners of it. I know you've done it on rod and reel. You've done traps. You've done...
I don't think I've ever caught a pike-sized golden shiner in a trap.
No.
No, our regulations in Massachusetts are too restrictive for the entrance size to the trap. Mm-hmm. So I don't think a big pondy can really swim in there. But
yeah. So when you're talking about pond shiner, like a golden shiner, and they're the typical shiners you buy at a bait and tackle shop. That's going to be 2 to 3 inches long, maybe 4 inches long at most shops. But when they exist in the wild, they can get to up to 10, 12 inches?
Yeah.
And that's, once they're that size, you like them for pike, I want them for largemouth bass, but you also fish them for bass too.
It's funny, I can keep 100 of them alive until March in my tank in my basement, and then as soon as it starts to get a little bit warmer in my basement, they start to die off, and it seems like all of my goldens die before the herrings show up and the largemouth bass really get turned on.
At one point, I remember I was the beneficiary of that. You're like, I'm clearing out my tank. I'm done with this fishing, and you're like, come on over and you can get some shiners. And I loaded up my tank and I did pretty well with them. But yeah, it's same. But I've got a much smaller tank. You've got a pretty big operation with yours.
Well, I have a 100-gallon boning tank down in the basement that I can keep fairly cool, and I have a koi fish pond pump and filter that filters the water for me.
And it's just those golden shiner, at least for largemouth bass, man, it's like an automatic. If you can put it in front of... The problem is, like, I always go with there and think, I'm going to get the 8-pounder on this. But it's the first fish over 3 pounds, over 2 pounds it sees it, tries to eat it. But what's the biggest bass you've caught on a golden?
I think I told you 10 years ago when we filmed that video, throwing swim baits, it was 8 pounds, 12 ounces, and it's still the same.
Man, that is an enormous northeast largemouth bass. But on that show, on that video you're talking about, that is a great story. So we were doing a video for St. Croix. It was one of the first short videos we ever put out. And we're like, we want to do one on Cape Cod largemouth bass and how Cape Cod still has a great largemouth bass fishery that's overlooked because of all the incredible saltwater fishing here. And we're like, okay, we're going to hit a couple ponds ourselves, but then we want to go with like somebody who's really dialed in on it. Because
for some reason you called me.
I know exactly why we called you, man. Anthony DeCicci and I went out and we were catching some fish, but nothing over 3 pounds. So we talked to him. We're like, hey man, like if we could get something like 4 pounds would be great. 5 pounds.
Cheech said we need a 6-pounder on camera. I said, there's no way.
Yeah,
we're going to do that.
So we went to a pond. It was you and me. We went out there with one of our cameramen at the time, Matt Doucette. And like, yeah, Cheech wanted 6 pounds. I would have been happy with anything over 4. Something that looked like a decent largemouth bass, just to say like, yes, there are good fish here. And you tell it. You tell it from here.
Well, the 4-wheel drive in my Tacoma wasn't working, so we got my truck stuck. You know, we had to, the shoreline was probably 10 feet from my front bumper by the time we got the boat off the trailer because we just launched the boat off some beach.
Yeah.
I had a 20-foot flats boat at the time, which is a pretty heavy boat for those little ponds. First stop was near a herring run in one of these big lakes, and one of the first casts, we got one that was up around 7 pounds, 7.5 pounds, I think.
7.13, man.
Yeah.
It was, you hooked it, and I remember you going, Jimmy, get the net, get the net. So I grabbed the net, and I made the initial scoop, and the fish jumped over it. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, I just blew the shot at netting the biggest largemouth bass I've ever laid eyes on in person. But then I got another shot at it. You threw it on the scale, and I remember you going, it's not going to give me 8.
Yeah. Well, that was on a soft body, soft plastic that I had rigged up, and I think they call it a Butch Brown rig.
Yes.
So your treble hook is attached with a piece of braided fishing line to the eye of the plug. And so the fish really can't throw it that easily. So a lot of the guys talk about throwing big baits with treble hooks. Like, you can't let them turn their head. You need to get them straight from where you hooked them into the net without them turning and jumping because they're going to throw the plug every time. But I think with that, it was a real Prey Alewife plug with that single treble hook attached with braided line. You got to do something seriously wrong to lose them.
And it was, we talked about the rigging before that, and you said that the way it's set up is it usually gets them right in the top of the mouth. And you said you didn't like the treble hook hanging off the bottom because sometimes it would get them in the gills if you did hook them, or it's more likely to gather weeds. So when you have the treble hook sitting on the top of the soft bait like that, which is, you do have to kind of you have to set that up yourself. The bait doesn't come that way. You said it's going to gives you a good hook set in the top of the mouth, keeps the bait clean out of the weeds, and man, that fish held on through my like flubbed net attempt, which I would have never forgiven myself for. But to put that fish on camera in the Northeast with one shot, it's not like we were out there for a week looking for it.
I think it was 10 minutes.
Yeah, it was pretty quick.
But we did fish the rest of the afternoon without getting another big one. So
it didn't matter at that point, man.
Yeah.
It was all
I just remember
gravy.
the sound it made. We put it in the live well, and it sounded like a striper thrashing around in the water down there.
Oh, it was an enormous fish, and the kickoff, the way we got great GoPro footage of that thing swimming off, just this dinosaur of a bass. Dude, that was.
But the thing is that fish had been eating herring. It's got a stomach full of eggs, so that fish might be 6 pounds in the summer. If you catch it in August on a Senko, it's 6 pounds, but it's almost 8 in the spring, and that's why we would target largemouth in the spring.
Yeah, looking for that biggest one when they are at their heaviest weight, that pre-spawn period. Like you said, they've got the eggs in them, they're fattening up.
Think about that same fish with 3 herring in its stomach. Now it's 9 pounds.
Do you still do a lot of bass fishing?
Almost none.
Yeah?
Yeah. I got so frustrated throwing swim baits that this year I was actually throwing a Senko.
I'm coming around to that myself. I caught more big bass when I just threw spinner baits. Like spinner baits and the KVD 1.5s.
Oh, yeah.
Little square bill crankbaits. And then I'm like, I want to catch a really big one, so I'm going to throw all big swim baits. And now it's like musky fishing for me now. Like I get one bite every 3 nights, and it's a 4-pounder or something, which
or
is
a 1-pounder.
Yeah,
it's amazing how small of a fish will eat an 8-inch swim bait.
But I think I'm with you. Next year I might go back to more of the traditional bass stuff, or spend more time catching the shiners.
Well, it's funny, as a lot of boat owners do, I get the 2-foot-itis. So as I buy a bigger boat, it gets worse for freshwater fishing. So I had the flats boat, which was great. You could throw it in any lake. And then I had a 20-foot Seacraft with a trolling motor on the front, so I could still throw it in bigger lakes and work my way along a shoreline. But now with the Contender, I can't throw it in any of the lakes around here.
Yeah, you've got a 23 Contender?
Yeah, it's a small Contender, but it's still, there's no trolling motor on it. It's a relatively deep hull. It's got a 350 Verado on the back that scares a lot of fish when you start it.
But it is a perfect boat for all the saltwater fishing you want to do around here.
It's small enough that I can launch it easily by myself. I can back it into my driveway, which is a pretty tight squeeze without any issues. I don't wash it. I might rinse it down. I don't have to care about it. You know, it's an older, beat-up boat, and that's what I like.
And, I mean, you fish, I think you were telling me earlier, like the boat ramp is what, a couple miles, 10 miles from your house, and the fishing's 3 miles from the boat ramp?
As a crow flies, it's about 3 miles to the ramp and then 5 miles to where I spend most of my time fishing in the spring.
That's the type of setup that lets you do an awful lot of fishing. And you said this spring was one of the best you've had, right?
What was amazing about this spring is those 2015 year class fish were the first ones to show up. So instead of being inundated with 20-inch schoolies like we usually are in the spring, they were 30, 32, 33 inches, which was pretty interesting.
That was cool. Yeah, it was such a solid class of fish that showed up from the beginning. I mean, there were so many years where you'd get your first bass, and it's 14, 15 inches long, and you're like inspecting this little fish for sea lice. But this year there was no question. You know, this was a good sized fish that came in from the get-go.
Yep. And then, you know, I always fish shallow in Buzzards Bay up in rock piles and off points, and expecting to find those 15 to 25 pound fish in the first week of May. This year was the same as it always is. They weren't as keen on topwater as I usually find them. I didn't catch any big fish on the dock this year, which I usually do. And
do you think they're getting hip to the dock?
I do, 100%. 10 years ago when I was buying the docks and they'd come in a manila envelope with no hooks or eyeballs or anything, it was unbeatable. And now we got to try and find out what the next new plug is.
What's the next dock? I feel that way. I've talked to a bunch of other guys who feel that way. When nobody knew about that, when it was like the worst, back when it was still the worst kept secret, when people were like, oh man, like what is that lure there? And you had to buy the blanks from Muskie Mania? Drifter Tackle.
Drifter Tackle.
And you would have to call up special lure, be like, look, send me them unpainted with no gear on them. And they were like $8.99 or $7.99 a piece. So you would buy, I don't know, you buy a couple dozen for them.
Yeah. Now they're $25 a piece, and you got to take the hooks and split rings off and throw them in the trash.
And I swear the knocker's not as loud. I think that, I don't know if the quality's gone down or if maybe that's just me, like, if that's just things ain't what they used to be.
So there's a couple knockoffs out there now that have a lot more rattle to them, and I don't think they work nearly as well. I think it's that older single knocker that really calls them up.
Yeah, that kind of low frequency, like ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. And man, it's like they couldn't resist it back
But they're so
then.
bad at eating it, too.
Yeah.
It's like you land 1 out of every 15 fish that hits it.
I have never caught a really big one on the dock, but I have had a lot of really big ones try to eat it. I watched one, I was on a jetty, and this fish, like, I don't know how, he was at my feet at the end, and it was one of the biggest bass I've ever not caught. Like, he just hit that thing out of the water. I'm like, how are you not getting, there's 2 4.0 grappling hooks on this. How are you not getting it?
Yeah.
But what's your rigging on the dock? What do you like for it?
I use 2/0 BKK Raptors.
Okay, the tuna ones.
Yeah.
So you like the curved?
I was fishing the 2/0 owner ST66s, and the BKKs I think is a very strong hook. It's a sharp hook. They just don't rust as fast as the owners.
Mm. Now, one issue I always had with the dock was the split rings opening up because it's such a long plug, and they would get a lot of leverage. Like even if they wouldn't open up, they'd oval, and you'd have to replace them. What do you have for a split ring? You don't do the swivel in between, do you?
No, I do the 8.0 owner hyperwire. Number 8, sorry, not 8.0.
I did do this. I've tried the swivel on them, and it's got so much drag on it, it kills the action. Like I've tried a million different riggings on the dock. I've tried the single big inline single hooks. I didn't quite. Missed more fish with that.
Yeah, I'll go to the big inline singles. So when I'm in like Cape Cod Bay and I know all the fish are 20, 25 pounds, and I could care less about hooking them. I just want to watch them eat it.
Yeah.
And it does a lot less damage to the fish. But one thing I do is I do pinch my barbs down from day one. Doesn't matter if I'm going after a 50-pounder with those treble hooks. I put way too many of them in my hands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, dude, especially those big raptors. That's not a fun one to get out.
I had a coworker out last year, and he put one in his hand, and I grabbed the mono. I took the hook off the plug, grabbed the mono, and I wrapped it around and went to go pull the hook out. and I watched my BKK go flying 30 feet off the side of the boat into the water. I'm like, that's a $5 hook. I didn't want to lose it.
Oh man, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So besides the dock, what are the other techniques you're using for those?
I fish a lot of live pogies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cast netting them?
Always.
Yeah.
Yeah. Snagged fish just don't last.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you fish? Have you gotten into the flutter spoons at all? If you tried those
have.
out, do you
So
like them?
last year off Plymouth, when there were a ton of pogies and the whales and the tuna up off of Whitehorse Beach, you could catch them on live pogies, but you could catch 5 for every one with a flutter spoon.
Really?
And they were smaller. But the big thing is you have to avoid snagging the pogies. If you're really aggressively jigging that flutter spoon, you're going to snag pogies. The only time I've really found success on the flutter spoon is when I'm around those big bait fish. So if I'm around a school of pogies, or if they're chasing them around like the west end of the canal or the east end of the canal, you can fish the flutter spoon and try and target those bigger fish down below, the smaller ones. It really is, I don't know if I heard you say it, but it's the underwater dock.
Oh,
It's
that
that-
wasn't me, but I like that.
It's
I'll gladly
that
take credit
big,
for it.
obnoxious plug that they just can't stay off of.
But it's not a searching plug, you're saying. So
No.
It's like the dock. That's one of the things. The dock will find the fish for you. But you
It's
said
the
you want to
drawing
see
power of
Yeah.
the dock. Like they say with swim baits and freshwater fishing, you can draw a fish off from 30, 40 feet away.
Yeah. So that's cool about the flutter spoons, man. And you mentioned last year in that incredible biomass of bunker that was off Plymouth, and this year they're not there. And I think that's led to kind of better canal fishing, maybe better west end of the upper Buzzards Bay fishing, because those fish that were there eating the bunker last year have had to transition to mackerel or other bait fish instead.
Yeah, and I think that they just really can't catch mackerel out in Cape Cod Bay. They're so fast, so
Yeah.
they have to corral them into the canal, and then they just go nuts on them.
That is, you used to do a pretty fair amount of canal fishing, right?
So
you went to the Maritime
when I was
Academy.
at school at the Maritime, I'd fish the canal 40 hours a week. And then, a year after, I would still get upset if I missed a good bite. And then a couple years after that, I'm happy for those guys. And now I could just care less. Like, I'm happy people can go catch fish there, but I have no interest in doing it myself.
Yeah.
I do like my wife and I will go walk the dog along the canal first thing in the morning. And it's fun watching the guys catch them.
It's a really cool place. And I was with you, man. If I missed a bite, I would be like, oh my God, well, I'm going to be there tomorrow. Or it just, and now I've kind of relaxed on that. I'm like, you know what? It's okay. There's going to be another blitz at the canal. You'll get there again. But I used to want to be at every single one, every breaking tide and all that. But
especially when you're hitting the breaking tide 5 days in a row, and on the 6th day it goes off and you slept in.
Dude, there's always that kind of decoy bad day. I would notice like it would go for 3 good days. Then there would be a bad one where like it didn't really happen. And then I'm like, well, I don't have to go back tomorrow then. And then on that day after the slow day would be the one time when they all moved. Like it's like they regrouped for their big final push, and that would be the best day of the whole blitz.
Yep. Yeah, it's amazing when that tide's breaking at 10 a.m. and they're still going off.
Dude, this has been a pretty good year for the canal. But just going back to the bunker in Plymouth, that's kind of what makes the fishing here so interesting, is that year to year is that different. That bunker thing was new in Plymouth. Like that hadn't happened on that scale ever. This year they're not there, so you're kind of
But I would
playing a
throw my
different
boat
game.
in at the east end of the canal and the water would be 70 degrees. Then you got up to that pocket of life up in Plymouth and the water was 58. So it was that cold water they were sticking in. But it was funny. You'd get there in the morning on an incoming tide and there'd be no bass around. And then all of a sudden the tide would change and it would just be inundated with those big fish. And I think I started fishing that Plymouth bite late, so the commercial guys had really removed a lot of bigger fish from that pod, because I was catching a lot of 34 and a half inch fish that had been caught before.
I think the bulk of the last year's commercial quota came right there.
Yeah.
This year it's been, for better or worse, it's been more spread out. So I think we're sitting here right now, early August, and it's 80%, 75% full.
I haven't even looked.
Yeah, I look at it just because I'm curious.
Well, it's nice to know what mornings the boat ramps are going to be jammed up.
Exactly. I look at it for that reason. Like, is it going to be a nightmare to get out? Mostly it's on days when I'm trying to go tuna fishing with somebody. I'm like, how early are we going to have to get at the ramp to beat the commercial bass crowd?
And I don't even know where the fleet's fishing this year. They all spread out? Are they all off Chatham? Are they all in Buzzards Bay?
I was out walking the beaches of Cape Cod Bay last night and just kind of reminiscing over the years that the fleet was there. And I mean, I would use the boats would find the fish with side scan, and I would use they'd use the side scan to find the fish. I'd use the boats to find the fish.
So that 46 that I caught from the beach was only because Terry Nugent was filming with Carter Andrews, and when they caught their big fish, they flipped every light on the boat on, and I was like, oh, and I ran down to where they were and caught it right in front of them because they had pinned the fish against the beach, or they had pushed the bow of their boat right against the beach. That's where the fish were.
That was a really cool bite, and I guess that happened for a few years before they really caught onto it with the side scan.
So before side scan really came out, we used to drive around at night just looking for the green flashes. As you'd spook the school of fish, they would kick off all the bioluminescence, and it would glow green, and you'd throw eels at them.
That's so cool, man. And that's the type of thing that really limits the amount of people that are willing to go and do that. Like you've got to run full dark at that point to be able to see the fire in the water that the fish are spooking. I remember the one night around that time you got that big one, I was fishing, right in front of the fleet, and the boat just put on a spotlight to see how close land was. He lit me up, and it spooked like a herd of giant fish that were at the end of my rod tip. I'm casting out toward where he is hooking fish. He's casting into the beach. There was just solid big bass that night. And, those fish, if those fish were out there somewhere last night, nobody knew, that's...
Yeah. But it was crazy because if you went out to 30, 40 feet of water, you would start seeing squid flash in the bioluminescence. And for some reason, those fish weren't out eating the squid. I don't think they were eating anything. They were just in there to hang out.
That was the big question. Like, people would keep them and say, like, they'd have a crab in their stomach or something.
Or a sand dollar.
There was no clear bait holding them, and they didn't seem to be really feeding. It's just a big school that was staging there. And I don't know if it was those fish were grouping up, getting ready to head south through the canal, or...
Well, I experience the same thing every spring in Buzzards Bay. I find a lot of big fish. I don't know if they're up sunning themselves in the shallow water by the rock piles to digest what they'd eaten that night, if they're just trying to warm up after their migration, but they're not eating. And that's why the dock was so effective, is because it was that reaction strike. You have this big, obnoxious plug going right over their heads, and they can't not eat it.
So I was going to ask you, like, what is your solution for those fish? Because we see them a lot. Kevin Blinkoff, our executive editor here, sees those fish constantly while he's kayaking. They'll just be finning, or he'll be spooking them as he paddles along. And he said a lot of times he's trying to get them on the fly, but he said they'll nose the fly but not really commit. He goes, they're clearly not eating in there. They're just kind of resting or digesting. And he's always had a lot, like, unless he has live bait, he can't seem to get them to move.
Well, that's a big answer right there. Yeah. It's hard for them to deny a live pogie, especially if you have a really strong, healthy one that's swimming as fast as it can. Once they start to get tired, I throw them out.
Okay.
I don't fish a tired pogie. And also fishing at night. There'll be 50 boats in an area during the day, and I'll be the only one there at night.
Are they in the same places at night? Okay. Because I haven't
They'll be in the same area, not in the same spot.
Okay.
But general area.
So I threaten to do this every year, like where Kevin's seeing and spooking them. I'm like, I'm going to go back at night with chunks. And then I'm like, well, if they're there and they're not eating, then maybe they're going out to the open bay and eating and then coming back there to stage. But you said they're kind of hanging in those in similar areas. I had no idea
how early the brown shark showed up until I tried chunking in those areas in late May, early June.
They're here in late May?
Yep.
The earliest one, I didn't know they were here early. I was snagging bunker with my kids in one of the harbors in Buzzards Bay, and then the guy was like, one of my kids just kicking his feet off the dock, and kid goes, somebody got a brown shark off this one last night. It's like, all right, Mark, come on over here. Let's not do that now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's something we're seeing a lot more of, is the brown sharks.
Not just us, the tuna guys are getting a lot more fish taken by brown sharks. And I think that it's a big problem in Florida up to like North Carolina. I was fishing with a couple guys from Virginia Beach in the Oak Bluffs tournament, and they said if you hook 12 yellowfin in a day, you're lucky to land 2.
Really?
Yeah, because the sharks are taking them.
Man, I hope that doesn't happen up here.
It's a sign of a healthy ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
I think they got rid of those commercial shark longlining boats down in like the mid-Atlantic, and so now a shark like a coyote will start to produce more pups when the population is in decline. And so now you have all these sharks that are producing more than the normal amount of pups, and they're not being taken by the commercial longliners.
Yeah, so we're kind of seeing like a boom in the shark population. It'll probably find its level eventually.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting point. I didn't know that, man. But we talked a little bit about tuna fishing. So you started out freshwater fishing, then got into the striper fishing. When did tuna become an obsession?
In my fishing career or this year?
Oh no, in your life, yeah. It's like,
Right around the time I was a senior in college is when everybody got into chasing what they were calling rat bluefin on spinning gear. So we started with trying to find the biggest surf reel we had in the basement and attach it to the heaviest 7-foot rod we had. A lot of guys were throwing them on like their wireline trolling rods, putting a big spinning reel on there. 50-pound braid, 50-pound fluorocarbon, throwing needlefish at them, or the tattoo sea pup was a popular plug back then.
I remember that. Yeah, dude, that was the
big mouth popper.
The tattoo sea pup, dude. I remember seeing pictures in the saltwater edge of guys holding tuna caught
but
on
even
that.
creek chubs, the bigger hooks on them we were throwing.
The Stetsko needles were one, too.
My biggest was the algag needle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there just was not, I mean, people were, like you said, it's mostly surf gear. Guys were just kind of repurposing surf casting tackle to cast at these tuna. And then, things just kept refining to the point where we are now.
But you used to go out in Cape Cod Bay on like a sunny afternoon with no wind, and you'd run up north of Billingsgate Shoal and you'd start seeing fish V-waking. And they were all, 80 to 150 pounds, and you could target them. Even when they were V-waking, you'd think, oh, there's no way these fish are going to eat. They're just hanging out. Throw a Ron Z in front of them, and they'd pile on it.
Oh, man. And that hasn't, I mean, at least I don't know. I haven't heard as much about that in recent years inside Cape Cod Bay. It seems like it's mostly giants. Those size fish, the recreational ones, seem to be more east of Chatham and south of the Vineyard or off Provincetown.
You hear rumors, little whispers in the ethos of Cape Cod Bay small fish, but I haven't experienced it.
It'd be the type of thing to keep quiet, because you could leave work at 5 o'clock and go out there and get 3 hours of tuna fishing in and then be home by 8. Whereas everything else is requiring a much longer run and commitment. But the idea of just a quick before work or after work tuna run is pretty.
It may be a long run, but those fish are somewhere within a couple miles of the beach, somewhere on Cape Cod.
Yeah.
Whether it's Nauset or Truro or P-Town. We've caught a lot of fish in 30 or 40 feet of water.
Now, I know you fish a lot of offshore tournaments too. How'd you get into that?
Working at the tackle shop, you would just meet guys that were desperate for crew. So they'd come in and say, hey, is anybody that work here somewhat experienced tuna fishing? And I've gone once, I'll go. So you go have a couple successful canyon trips, and then you decide you're going to go on your own with somebody that's inexperienced on their boat. And, oh, man, the one thing I learned last week's not working. What are we going to do? So it turned into a lot of canyon mahi fishing.
But how long have you been doing the tournaments?
I think, back in the day of Falmouth Grand Prix, it was probably 2013, 2014, my first offshore tournaments.
Okay.
And then 2014, 15, I started fishing the Tuna Fest tournaments that Damon put on out of Hyannis. 15 was the first year of the Oak Bluffs Blue Water Classic. So I fished that tournament, and I've been fishing that one ever since. This was my first year fishing the Nantucket Big Game Battle.
Okay. So, and what is your role as part of the on your crew? What do you do?
So 3 years ago was my first year fishing on the boat that I'm currently fishing on, and it was just I had to do everything. The owner of the boat, super nice guy, super experienced fisherman, but he had to drive the boat. So it was me and a bunch of people that had never really gone tuna fishing. So I'm rigging 100 ballyhoo a day. At the end of the 2-day tournament, I can't even run the riggers out. My hands are so beat up, gaffing every fish, trying to direct people, hey, reel in that reel, reel in that rod.
Oh, dude, that's
But now we've got a really good team now, so I can kind of lay back and help out wherever I can. I don't have to be in charge of anything, but I kind of run the cockpit. Okay. So I'm setting up the spread, deciding what we're going to use for lures or baits. Constantly swapping out ballyhoo, rigging ballyhoo. During the Oak Bluffs tournament was the first year that we fished natural dredges. So I'm rigging mullet. And
did you make? That's got to be so intense to make.
It's a lot of work, but we had a mate with us he's a captain. He was running as our mate from Virginia Beach, and they fish a lot of Marlin tournaments, so he was experienced and
so
showed
explain
me how to do it.
For the offshore layman, what is a dredge?
So it's a teaser that fishes underwater almost like an umbrella rig. So you fish a 10-pound weight in front of this triple-tiered umbrella rig, basically with no hooks in it. And it's a mixture of plastic squid, plastic fish, and natural ballyhoo or mullet.
So, and the idea between the natural ones are just going to move so much better than the...
Not even. I think it's because the fish come up and they hit it with their bill. You're targeting marlin when you're fishing a dredge. Mm-hmm. And they come up and hit a ballyhoo and they know something's real. They hit a plastic squid and they know it's fake.
Okay. Yeah, so they can be that finicky on.
People
on
talk about the scent in the water, but I think that scent only lasts a few minutes as you're trolling 8 knots.
Yeah, they've got to get washed out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So trolling the natural dredges, and that's what pulls them up.
Yeah, so when we're marlin fishing, we're fishing 2 dredges, which are on the big LP electric reels out of the outriggers with a double pulley system. So for every revolution of the LP, you're pulling in a foot of line, but you're only moving that dredge 4 inches.
Okay.
So it's a big mechanical advantage because these things pull real hard. You could never attach it to like an 80 and pull it off the side of the boat.
Yeah, 10 pounds of weight at 8 knots
Yeah.
with a whole bunch of stuff trailing behind it. Like
Yeah.
you said, must be some incredible resistance on that.
Yeah, and then we fished 2 teasers off the bridge electric reels. So the captain has electric reels over his head that he can pull in. If a marlin comes up on a teaser, we have a natural chase bait, which is fine if a marlin's whacking it with his bill or nibbling on it. Mm-hmm. But if he grabs that Spanish mackerel or that horse ballyhoo and that's his meal, he's gone. So you want to get that teaser away from him and pitch him a ballyhoo on a circle hook or a mackerel on a circle hook.
So you're not waiting. Do you have any hooks out in the spread when you're marlin fishing?
That's kind of an area of contention. In the mid-Atlantic, they don't fish any. It's all teaser fishing. So they're fishing circle hook, ballyhoo, and teasers. In the Gulf, when they're targeting blue marlin, they're doing a lot of live bait trolling, which is not popular up here. But then you go to Hawaii, and it's all fishing J hooks. They're trolling lures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the big smokers and the black barks and stuff. Yeah.
So right now, I'm fishing my long riggers are hook baits because if a blue marlin comes up on a long rigger that's 150 feet back, there's no way I'm going to pitch him anything.
Yeah.
Especially with those outriggers being 35 feet long. That bait is so far out of the wake, I couldn't get a bait to it if I wanted to. So my short riggers are teasers. I have my teasers on the flat lines, and then I have ballyhoo on like a Molecraft chuggerhead right in the wash, and that's a bait that's in free spool, so they can come up and eat it, and the line's in free spool. I can lock it up and hook them. But really what I can do is run over there, pop it out of the clip, and feed it back to my teaser.
So you want them to be... Do you have to use circle hooks?
You don't have to, but your hookup ratio is a heck of a lot better. And once you hook them, you can do whatever. You can put it back in free spool after you hook them. They can't shake a circle hook that's right in the corner.
Okay.
So if you have a big bow in your line, this fish is 500 yards away, your line's pointed this way, and the fish is over way off your starboard side, you know that hook's not going to come out. And we've all, everyone that fishes the canyons has hooked a blue marlin on a spreader bar and watched it jump once and your spreader bar goes flying. You just can't hook them that well.
Yeah. Yeah, the only blue marlin I've ever seen in the canyons was one that ate a yellowfin tuna we were fighting. And it was a pretty incredible experience. But this is going to be a tough one to answer, but how common are blue marlin out there? Like how many, in your canyon season generally, how many do you run into? Even just seeing out there?
One a trip is pretty typical. But
really?
Like during the Tri-State tournament, there were 11 caught out of 100 boats.
Is that a lot or no?
That's a lot, I think.
I thought it was a lot.
Because that's not seen, that's caught.
Yeah.
That's recorded for points in the tournament.
Because Anthony and I were doing an offshore fishing report, and we talked about that, and to me that seemed like an awful lot for a 3-day stretch. 11 blue marlin caught in the New England canyons is it's more than I figured were out there.
Yeah, but during big game battle, we hooked a blue marlin on a J hook, and he dumped 50 yards of line in a second, and then was gone. And I had one white marlin come up on my teaser, and 48 hours of trolling, only seeing one. It's pretty slow. And of course, I'm up in the bridge, and the fish comes up on my left teaser. I start cranking in, and I turn the boat over to a starboard turn slowly to try and get that fish in nice clear water. And I'm thinking, we didn't hook him, but I did a good job. And then the guys down in the cockpit are like, no, you were way too slow. I'm like, that was my first time. So as soon as that marlin comes up on your teaser, you got to get it out of his face.
Okay.
And I probably waited 20 seconds watching him chewing on it before I started cranking it in.
So you have to get it out of there. When you say clean water, you mean with no bait in front of him, or
no
like
wake,
out of the wake?
Out of the white water. Yeah. So as you turn to whichever side the marlin comes up on, now he's in that nice clean water that's coming off the side of the hull instead of the whitewash coming out of the engines.
So marlin fishing, that's a lot more interactive than tuna trolling. You were telling me earlier that you said like before you were somebody didn't get why people were so obsessed with marlin fishing. You said you've kind of come around on that. Like
it used to really bother me when we would hook a big blue marlin at 6 a.m. with yellowfin airing out all around the boat, and I'd be stuck for an hour fighting this stupid marlin that I can't take home. But marlin, they all have their own different personality. Sometimes they stay up and jump themselves to exhaustion, and you can just back the boat right up to them, grab the leader, and pop them off after 5 minutes. Sometimes a big blue marlin will sit with its head away from you down 100 feet, and you just can't they have their big pec fins out. You can't lift them. So guys talk about trying to back up and around the marlin to pull them from their nose. Things you can do with a boat to try and get them to come up and jump. We've tried backing the drag way off. We've tried putting it up to 60 pounds. When you're fighting on an 80 out of a chair, you can put a lot of pressure on those fish.
Oh, yeah.
So even at 60, 70 pounds of drag, you can't lift their head up.
Now, when a marlin's doing that, how is it compared to a giant bluefin? I have no experience with blue marlin, but I fought enough giant bluefin. How's that compare?
So I've only fought 6 or 7 blue marlin in my limited career, but they don't roll over and pinwheel like a bluefin does.
Okay.
And you don't fish them from a dead boat like you do with a bluefin.
You're always moving?
Yeah.
Okay. And so they're harder to land or just different?
Just different, but you're not fighting out of the rod holder.
Yeah.
So if you're fighting out of a harness or out of the chair, you're much more in tune with what the fish is doing.
So knowing what guys are doing with like the light tackle jigging stuff and being able to land 90, 100-inch giants, could you do that with a comparable size blue marlin?
There are a lot of big blue marlin caught, especially in the mid-Atlantic on Talica 25s and 30-pound mono.
Okay.
We did a 100-pound yellowfin during Oak Bluffs on, we call it the dink rod, 25-pound mono.
100-pound yellowfin, man. Did it have the big
No, it didn't
fins?
have the huge sickles.
It's so strange. We had Dr. Jeff Kneebone in here last year talking about like the Allison tuna, the long sickle fins on them, and he goes, nobody really knows why that morphology is, what creates that. And then just this past week, he was out south of the vineyard, and on a pink Ronzi, he caught I think he said it was a 60-inch yellowfin that had the big Allison fins on it. So.
Yeah, I've never caught a big Allison.
No.
Those big 150, 170s.
But that fit at 60 pounds. How heavy is it? I'm sorry, at 60 inches.
Probably in that 110, 115
Okay, so
range.
yeah, that's
They're definitely a leaner fish than a bluefin.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I saw the picture of it. It's a beautiful picture, and it's skinnier than a bluefin, but it has those big fins.
Yeah. And then of course a bigeye, you can tell because you lay it on its side on the deck and it keeps rolling. It can't lay flat. They're so round.
Now, how have you been doing with bigeye this season?
We got a few during Oak Bluffs. We didn't get bit during Nantucket, but other boats around us did. It's really a lottery with the bigeyes.
Yeah. Is there a better way to target them?
Big plugs.
Okay.
Dark plugs. First light, last light. Some people troll into the dark. We usually want to get off the troll and start fishing for swordfish at night, but a lot of guys will, especially during tri-state where the tuna are the ones that are cashing the big checks, they'll fish for bigeye all night.
What is it like? I've never done that, but I can't imagine trolling at night in the canyons. There's no lights around you, and when that rod goes, that's got to be one of the craziest feelings, dude, when you're trolling and a bigeye comes up and hits a deep diver at night.
We had one during Nantucket that, ate the shotgun bait, dumped 200 yards of line, and we're thinking this is our bigeye. It's 250 points in the tournament that we desperately need, and it turned out to be like a 75-pound yellowfin that just had all the fight in them.
Oh, dude.
But it is exciting because you assume everything's a bigeye at night.
Yeah.
But it's really frustrating because you never know which plugs have weed on them. It's kind of hard to set your spread unless you mark your lines during the daylight of how far back you want your lures.
Yeah, that's true. So you've got to, I guess you have to be really dialed in on it. And then to check the plugs, to pull that much resistance back, are you pretty much stopping the boat to check for weeds?
No. I mean, you can check your spreader bars. We fish a lot of heavy sea witches with ballyhoo at night.
Okay.
And we fish the diving plugs a lot. And the diving plugs can definitely be frustrating, but that's how you're getting a lot of wahoo as well. Speaking
of which, I saw a picture of you with a big wahoo this year that annihilated the plug.
I don't think I ever touched the fish.
Oh, no?
So it wasn't a picture of me holding it, but I was on the boat when we caught it.
What did I? Well, we'll edit this part out.
Yeah, it was probably Chaz holding it.
Okay.
Or one of the other guys.
But yeah, it was like a wahoo with a mangled. What was that? A deep diver, mad scad.
Yeah, that was a Nomad DTX 220.
Okay.
And the plug did its job perfectly, but the fish came up and swung his head around and smacked the side of the boat, and that's what broke the face off the plug.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but just landing, an 80-pound wahoo on a plug with no wire is pretty cool.
That's pretty awesome, man.
Yeah.
When you're trolling those deep dive, when you're trolling at night in general, hoping for a big eye, is the trolling speed different? Are you going the same speed, slower?
It's almost like bluefin fishing.
Okay.
4 or 5 knots, bigger plugs, bigger spreader bars. Any of the big 9-inch squid spreader bars that you used to fish off Chatham will work well for bigeye.
Has anybody ever caught a swordfish trolling?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
That's got to be cool.
During day and night.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. There was a big, like a 400-pounder caught during the Oak Bluffs tournament a few years ago that a guy caught daytime trolling.
Oh, that's swordfish are another of those things that like I'm dying to catch. I don't know if I want to catch a blue marlin more or a swordfish more. Swordfish, like the idea of catching one at night, I love the idea of that, dude. The daytime stuff, daytime dropping, I'm a little less interested in getting one that way.
Yeah.
But
it's almost like giant bluefin fishing where you can go out at night, set your 3 squid out and leave them and not care, and you're going to catch a third of the fish that people that are there tending their lines all night are going to catch. Resetting your drift, it's a pain in the butt at night to move the boat around the fleet back to restart your drift, especially when we have 8 people on the boat, only 2 are awake at night. Now you got to wake everyone else up when you start the boat to move it to reset your drift. But if you have productive bottom, marking a lot of bait and you get out of it, you really have to move the boat back to restart your drift. And I think a lot of guys kind of zone out at night and just make one long drift all night.
I haven't done a ton of them, the canyon trips overnight, but on a private boat. I've done a lot on head boats, but every time I've been out there, they've treated it like a set it and forget it. Like, we're going to set the sword baits out. Somebody wake me up at first light.
Yeah.
And then
you got to check them every hour because squid love eating squid.
Yeah. Oh, and have you caught a lot of swordfish?
No.
No.
A handful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I've pulled the hooks on quite a few.
Because they have soft mouth. Yeah. So the blue marlin thing, you said you're kind of getting more and more into the marlin fishing, and that is so interesting to me. Do you have is everybody watching the spread? Like, do you have everybody looking?
In an ideal world, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Usually, you want to have a guy standing there with a pitch rod in his hand at all times.
Wow. Man.
But after 24 hours in the canyon, it's hard to get.
I was going to say
people that want to stand there.
You said you saw one white marlin, and that guy's got to have a tired arm by the time the guy waiting with the pitch rod.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, the guys down in the Mid-Atlantic have it down to a science where you're fishing your long riggers on TAC 25s out of the rocket launcher. So you have one guy standing there all day holding onto the lines, waiting to feel that tap, and then the reels start going. You got to make sure your hands are there because your reel's in free spool, so it's going to bird nest if like a tuna eats it.
Yeah. So he's waiting to feel the fish come up before he even sees it. That's such a different. See, I don't know what I don't know about marlin fishing, and
there are 150 to 60 foot sport fish boats fishing a tournament, and the crews that are putting in the extra effort to be dialed in, 24 hours a day are the ones that are going to be winning the tournaments.
Now, if you were going out there for fun, would you be that intense about the marlin fishing, or a little bit more laid back?
Well, fun for me or fun for the crew?
Fun for you.
Fun for me is trolling for 18 hours and maybe seeing one marlin.
That's fun for you?
Yeah. I've caught enough tuna. I mean, I haven't caught more than anyone else, but I don't need to bring home 400 pounds of meat every trip, and I don't need to kill everyone that comes over the rail.
No, I get that, man. And to have that next new obsession, I understand. You kind of feel like you have tuna, not that you ever fully figure things out, but more. And marlin, there's probably more to learn.
Well, plus
for you at least.
A lot of the times from 10 a.m. until 3 p.m., the tuna fishing's pretty slow. So you can go deep dropping for swordfish, or you can go trolling for marlin.
So shifting gears back to inshore, one of the things that, just hearing about what you're catching from the guys at Falmouth Bay and Tackle or talking to you, you always seem to be trying something or doing something different that other people aren't thinking about. There was a couple years ago, where we had a really tough albie bite, and you were one of the only guys catching them because you were vertical jigging for them. Do you remember that?
I think every albie I've caught vertical jigging has been, the albies aren't here, so I'm going to catch a sea bass to pass the time, and then they happen to swim by and you catch one.
Yeah.
Another thing that I used to do is fill the live well full of peanut bunker.
That's
so I'd
right.
go out and try and start my own blitz. So I would use my spot lock trolling motor to just sit in one spot in a productive area and, throwing out handfuls of bait at a time. Eventually they'd come around and find you.
Now, are you able to keep them with you for a decent amount of time, or is it?
No, they take off as soon as you throw them in the water. It's not like offshore where they'll kind of use the boat as structure to hide under. In my experience with the peanut bunker, as soon as you throw them in, they're spreading out and getting eaten.
Dude, so right now, end of the summer, you said your tournament season's done. What is next for your what's happening for the rest of your season here?
Well, I still have some serious FOMO for the guys that are out chasing the bluefin east of Chatham on spinning gear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When's your next window doing that?
Well, I was supposed to go tomorrow, Thursday, but the weather doesn't look like it's going to let us get out. So next week, hopefully.
Nice, man. And you do a lot of fishing with your dad.
I do.
And you said it sounded like it's a similar story to mine, where your dad wasn't into fishing until you got into fishing. Like my dad fished because I liked it, and it sounded like you kind of a similar deal with you guys.
Yeah, when my dad was a kid, he had an uncle that would take them a couple times a year, and he would do some ice fishing up around Moosehead when he was in college. But he had never really gotten into striper fishing, and he actually caught a striper before I did. He worked at a power plant in Maine, and they used to come into the warm water discharge all the way up in central Maine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So living in Maine, we used to just throw the canoe in the river and go fish 4-inch plastic shads and see if we could catch them. And
now, is he as into it as you are now?
I am. I feel bad about the lack of time he has for fishing now. With my sister moved into a new house this year, so he helped out a lot with getting the new house ready and family obligations before he can come out and tuna fish. Because for him, it's a 2-hour drive each way. He spends the night at my house the night before, fishes all day, and then drives home and deals with that mass pike traffic at night.
I fished with you guys a couple times, and it's so cool. Like, knowing you guys have fished your whole lives together, and just like you're always on the same page. Like you guys are always working in tandem. It's really it's cool to watch you guys work together and fish together. And man, we were out last November 3rd, chasing bluefin tuna, and man, you guys both hooked one, and that was a fun day, dude. That was a day where it took us a while to get them, but then at the end of the day, got it done, and it was like a classic tuna struggle with the.
It is when you don't know what you're doing wrong.
Yeah.
When your buddy boat's hooked a few fish already, and you're throwing your plugs right where they need to be, trying to crack the code.
It is the type of day where you're like, you almost want to turn the radio off. It's like, oh, got another 7 for 9. And you're like, what? Like, I've thrown at 1 million tuna today, and none of them have eaten. But it's like you said, it's just getting that right cast that the fish sees, and it's the right fish.
Yeah.
Sometimes
it's important in tuna fishing not to chase the radio. You hear someone saying 10 miles away they got fish. Well, you've got fish in front of you. It may be a little bit better over there, but I'm not going to waste 30 minutes running over there.
Yeah.
You stick to what you know, and then a day like we had, I know that if I throw a 155 blue deep seductress at these fish enough, they're going to eat it. But as soon as I switched it up to a white 185, started getting bit.
It is so frustrating. You're like, if I changed to it sooner, was that the difference maker, or was it another of countless variables that led to hooking that fish at the end of the day?
Yeah, it is amazing how you can have fish in the area, but you're not really seeing them feed. And then all of a sudden they come up and start feeding, and your friend who's 15 miles away experiences the same thing. At the same time, they all come up and start feeding. And I don't know if it has to do with the rise and set of the moon. People talk about majors and minors a lot in muskie fishing, and in sword fishing, we don't talk about it a lot in bluefin fishing. It could be fishing around slack tide. Our friend Rob always likes to give me a hard time whenever we see a school of fish come up and feed and then go down. He always says, "Oh, that must have been slack." Just because
he's not a believer in it.
No, he just knows it bothers me when he says that.
Dude, the muskie thing with the moon, I've been muskie fishing a couple times, and the one time I'm on the boat and the guy goes, "All right," he looks at his watch, he goes, "The moon's under our feet." He's like, "It's rising in wherever on the other side of the earth is China." He goes, "Now it's our window." I'm like, how are these muskies in Furnace Lake in New Jersey? How do they know what the moon's doing on the other side of the earth?
Yeah, well, I have noticed it in sword fishing at night that moonrise is a hot time to get bit.
Okay, that's interesting. Like, is there a particular moon phase? Like, is it the full moon is better?
No,
for
people
sword
say
fishing?
that on a new moon you fish deeper, on a full moon you fish shallow.
Oh, really?
Good
Like
friend of
opposite
mine.
stripers.
Yeah, a good friend of mine caught a swordfish the night before I was out last week on a 400-foot bait, and it was a full moon. So it kind of goes against what you're told.
So you're fishing them that deep at night?
I'll usually set up my first bait as a floater, maybe 40 feet down. Second bait's 150 feet down, and then I usually fish 3. My tip rod could be anywhere from 500 feet down up to 200 feet down. But I want somebody constantly working that tip rod, slowly lowering it down, slowly working it back up. And I think that accounts for a couple extra bites a season.
I'm internally taking notes because my swordfish shot is coming on September 30th. I'm going on the Helen H, and I'm going to devote a big chunk of the night. If there's no early night tuna bite, I'm switching right to swords, and I'm going to try to get one. I haven't gotten one yet. Have you noticed? Does a swordfish can it happen right after sundown, or do you have to get a little bit deeper into the night?
I would say 75% of my swordfish bites have been before midnight.
Before midnight.
Oh.
Okay, that's good to know.
I don't know if there's anything to that or if it's the luck of the draw. Maybe it's because that's when my baits are fresh and I'm still checking them when I need to check them.
Yeah.
You know, I'll check them 3 or 4 times before midnight, but then from midnight to sunrise, it might be once. You get lazy. You get tired.
I could see that. Usually when I swordfish on the, when I do make my attempt on the head boats, I wait for, like 1 a.m. I'm usually doing it after midnight because that's when most people the tuna fishing is usually kind of slow between, say, 12 and 4, 12 and 5. And a lot of guys go down and sleep, so you've got more space, so I can send out a sword bait. But if there's nothing happening, let's say by 10 o'clock, I'm going to switch over. I'll report back. You'll be the first to know if I catch a swordfish.
Think about that nice clear blue water. How far can a swordfish actually see your LP light? 100 feet, 200 feet? I mean, you can see it when you're cranking in your far bait, you can see it from 200 yards away.
Yeah.
So I like to have my high bait half a mile away from the boat. And then my next one is a quarter mile away from the boat. They can see those lights from a long ways off.
Yeah, especially and maybe the further you are away from that big lit party boat with all the chum. My issue is 90% of the time I drop my squid down and catch a blue shark. If I don't get it, and I think my issue was not putting it deep enough.
Yeah.
I think if you're in like the top 100 feet, it seems like a blue shark finds your squid almost immediately at those fall
we
canyon trips.
Caught a few small makos this year doing that.
Oh, that's cool.
No, it's not.
The makos are very cool. Dude.
Yeah,
but not when you're looking for a sword,
I'm not a
I guess.
fan.
No,
makos and I don't get along.
Oh, why?
Well, just because they destroy spreader bars, and
that's true.
Every time you put a diving plug down in 30 fathoms, you're going to catch one.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's got to be a mess to deal with
Yeah.
unhooking that. So, inshore, will you get back to inshore fishing at all this fall? Do you do any albie fishing or striper fishing at the back end of the season?
If I can get out once in the fall and catch 10 albies, I'm good for the year. I don't need to chase them around every day. I like to get them when they first come in. They're big, they're stupid. When they get on that rain bait, in late October, it's just too frustrating.
If you're going to work that hard for something, it better be a bluefin.
Yeah. I think it was 2 years ago. I still had my Seacraft, and I was launching my boat in Upper Buzzards Bay, and I caught 2 albies all year on consecutive days, and they were both off Quick's Hole. So it's a 60-mile round trip for 1 albie.
Oh, man. What else, man? What's next? Marlin fishing, and then what's...
I'm looking forward to a lot of running and gunning.
Yeah.
Whether it's I have to jig for them or hopefully get them on top water, those bluefin. I do enjoy going out in October in Upper Buzzards Bay and just catching some schoolies before I have to put the boat away. Find the birds working in Buzzards Bay.
It is nice to kind of end the season on it ends like it began. You have the schoolies that move in late April, early May, and then you kind of end it in late October on those same size fish. And I don't. I love fishing Cape Cod. I love the rhythm of the seasons here. I know that we're kind of on opposite sides of Buzzards Bay, so we fish a lot of the kind of a similar season, then switch over to freshwater stuff in the wintertime.
Well, we didn't talk about our shared love of weakfish.
No, we didn't, and that's right, man. Yeah. I did okay this year. I got a couple.
I got 0.
Really? Yeah. But you had a great year last year.
I did.
And you saw, was it your cousin?
Yeah, my cousin from New Hampshire. I'd never heard of a weakfish. He was coming down to go striper fishing the next morning, and I said, let's go try for a weakfish before sunset. So I think we caught a couple of the males, the 16, 17 inchers.
Yeah, the one.
And then he hooks up, and he's fishing a 3,000 twin power on 10-pound braid, and thing's dumping line. And I'm like, it's a bluefish or a striper, no big deal. And the thing comes up in the lights, and it's, probably 10 p.m. at this point. And holy moly, that's the biggest weakfish I'd ever seen.
I saw the picture, man. That was a beautiful fish, and it's always that way. It's somebody who appreciates it, but not as much as somebody who's really hunting for one like that.
This guy's had a horseshoe up his ass his whole life. The group of guys that I fish moosehead with have been doing it for 30 years, and every day they set out their 5 traps apiece with smelt, and they're looking for lake trout. And the first year he went up, he and I are jigging in the hut all day because it was like 10 below zero, and he got one bigger than they had ever caught in their 30 years.
Oh, man. How big was it?
It wasn't huge. It's moosehead, so there are a lot of small lakers. I think it was about 28, 29 inches.
It's a big fish, man.
Yeah.
It's a great fish to catch
on
through
my
the
little
ice.
fiberglass noodle rod that I use for perch.
I've done moosehead. I've done it once, and it is so cool up there. I mean, you are so far removed, and the drive up there is it's a pretty wild drive. You've got this giant snowbanks on either side of the road, like
Yeah.
you
Giant frost heaves.
yeah.
Yeah.
And like you said, man, the lake, there's a ton of Lakers, and they look very different from the Sebago ones, where the Moosehead ones are like darker and a little bit thinner.
Mm-hmm. Well, the water's darker.
Okay.
Yeah, in Sebago, the water's super clear. And also, I don't know if in Sebago they're eating alewife. They're landlocked alewife. And up in Moosehead, found a lot of crayfish in their bellies, smelts, yellow perch. There's more and more yellow perch up there, even though the Mainers don't want them.
Yeah, when we fished Sebago a couple years ago for a TV show, the guides there said that the coloration of the Lakers changes based on their predominant diet. Like they said, they're lighter in color, and if you slice it open, you'd find a ton of alewives in it. They said the darker ones, and we did catch a few, said they're more on the smelt. But the cool thing I really liked about Moosehead was the Cusk potential up there, and I did catch a couple on my trip. You ever get them?
We catch a lot of small ones, and
Yeah.
we always think of them as being these lazy fish that come up and eat the smelt, and they won't even set the flag off on the trap. But when you're jigging with a sonar, you see how quickly they come in. They're pretty aggressive.
Oh yeah, I caught one jigging, and it was a weird fight, but ended up being a really nice Cusk. Took it back here and ate it, and it was good. Have you eaten them?
No.
Are you a big fish eater?
I'm not. I love, I got a fridge full of mahi right now for fish tacos, and I like tuna raw. I don't really cook it and eat it, but I don't eat any freshwater fish.
Yeah, Cusk was kind of I'd heard it's just like cod. I heard it's the best freshwater fish you can eat besides maybe walleye, and it was fine. You had to remove. I had to put it out of my head like the cleaning process of it because that was pretty gross.
Yeah, and the old timers in Maine talk about cooking they'll cut them up into rings and put them inside pantyhose and make fish chowder with them so the fish stays together, and then you dump out the pantyhose right before you eat them.
That's kind of funny, man. Yeah, I guess you'd buy them new. But Kev, man, thank you so much for joining us for a podcast, dude. I can't wait to hear how the rest of your season goes. I hope I have a swordfish to report to you.
Thank you very much. I hope you join us again.
Absolutely, man. I had a great time fishing with you guys.
Yeah. All right.
All right, man.